Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Sarah, for reminding us.
Reminding, yes, thank you. So just to say that I think the whole issue of care and caring has become so important in the context of the virus. And in particular, I think it's thrown a spotlight on a whole series of issues, which a number of the speakers will pick up. But I just wanted to sort of maybe think about a few issues, such as the issue of the evaluation of care. Who is doing the caring? What responsibilities are those who are doing the caring? And what does it mean for the people who are working in care, both paid and unpaid? And one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in is the way in which care has been so typically seen as being low skilled, and of course, consequently very poorly paid and very undervalued. And yet in the UK, we've suddenly found that carers are now become key workers. The question is, what will that mean? Will this go beyond the virus or not? I mean, will we see a return back to the undervaluing of care in the future? So the issue also is that the manifestations of care in all aspects of our lives have suddenly also come to the fore. The way that we care for each other within families, amongst friends, in the community, but also I think we need to think about the inequalities, who has access to care, who doesn't have access to care, who is taking on the responsibility, what do we mean by caring state? Might we have a more caring state? And some of us might feel in the neoliberal climate that's not very likely. So these are some of the issues. And then finally, I think one of the issues, I'm not sure if it's come up elsewhere within Europe certainly, but in the UK it's become quite a big issue, is the gender inequalities in relation to publications and the ability to conduct an academic life, because there's been a lot in the papers about the inequalities in the sense of women's submissions apparently plummeting to journals, but men doing very well for themselves. So I think, and of course the argument here is that it has been because women have picked up the caring responsibilities, the home education, which takes hours and hours on end. So these are just some of the issues that have been coming up. So these were just a few words of introduction. But I just want to take up some housekeeping rules, you could say. So the first thing is that we have a chat function, which everybody should be able to see on the right-hand side. And you can, what will happen there is if you post your questions, they will be taken up as far as we can in the discussion session. Could you please mute yourself unless you speaking, so basically so that we don't get echo and number of people speaking. I can't remember which, they're the ones that the key ones that I noted down. We are recording the session, so please be mindful of that. Katerina, anything else that I've missed out?
Yeah, we perhaps wanted also to remind people that the recording of the session then will be made available on the website of AtGender. So if you don't want your picture public, then turn your cameras off. I also wanted to join Eleonor in welcoming you to the session and in the name of AtGender. I know, or I assume that by now you have heard a lot about what Gender does. AtGender is the European Association for Gender Research, Education and Documentation. You will, perhaps most notably for members of the organization, we are providing literature and books that we publish and values that we issue. We have done more than 15 over the years, and you will find more detailed information on the website of the organization. Since we are on a tight schedule and we have a lot of presenters, I will keep the introduction short. I also want to apologize ahead because I have another dissertation defense lined up right after the panel, so I will have to leave a couple minutes before we wrap up. And Asa from AtGender was also so nice and lovely to offer that she will step in and do the wrapping up for us. And also I do want to extend thanks to Eleonor for all the work that she did on putting this panel together. I was put on as only like support in the name of AtGender, and I want to recognize all the labor that went into making this happen. So thank you. And as Eleonor said, we have divided the speakers into 2 smaller groups so that we can have discussion in the middle and don't have to keep all the questions till the end. So we have tried to come up with a theme coherence. So the first 4 speakers will be touching in more detail on the issue of labor and how labor manifests differently in the face of the present pandemic. We will ask the speakers to introduce themselves very briefly and be mindful of the 5 minutes so that everybody can speak as they planned. And I think with that, I would say the floor is open to the first speaker, Eleonor.
Before we move on to Jaqueline, is that as Carly has reminded us, we are fundraising for Treasures Foundation. So if you could donate, and it's at the bottom of Carly's message on chat, please do. Okay, so the first speaker is Jaqueline Milner, who's joining us from the other side of the globe. So it's about 10:13 her time in Australia. So very welcome, Jaqueline.
Thank you very much, Eleonor. Yeah, and thank you very much for allowing me to go first. Yes, that it's deep into the night here. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for AtGender. Thank you, Carly and all the team for organising an online version that has allowed us to come together in this way that's become all, I hate to use that term, but like the new normal, right? This is the way we're interacting. So we've been conducting our classes and our research seminars and all our meetings. So today I wanted to speak about my project, the CARE project, which is Care, Feminism, Art and Ethics in Neoliberal Times, and how that the issues and the activities that we've been considering in that project that's been going for about 2 years coalesces with so many of the issues that, Eleonor, you've already introduced in terms of what COVID the challenges and the changes that has wrought in our societies. So the project really began as a way of responding to crisis, and this was obviously before this crisis, and in particular we were, as a group of artists and theorists, curators, writers, performers, and interdisciplinary researchers, how do we respond to climate emergency, for instance? How do we respond to toxic inequality, to the crisis in our First Peoples, in the relations with First Peoples in our country, the continuing subjection to racism, to huge rates of incarceration, and of course, how do we respond to the continuing institutionalized sexism and gendered violence? And now, how to respond to pandemic and its aftermath. So, and in thinking about how we respond to that, one of the widely felt affects was, paralyzing anxiety and hopelessness. So, the CARE project kind of is a response to that paralyzing anxiety and hopelessness by trying to form a kind of solidarity that draws largely on the kind of protest movements that we've seen in very recent years that have rallied around different types of solidarities that are not necessarily based on kind of asserting one's individual rights, but really about kind of honouring that idea, which is at the core of care ethics, is that we're all interrelated, and it's not us as individual autonomous individuals that societies are formed, but through the relations between us, and recognizing that interrelationship has been so acute in the current crisis. So in other words, many of the issues that we'd started thinking about have been thrown into incredibly sharp relief in the last few months. So that sense that, that we share vulnerability is at the core of the CARE project, and acknowledging that we, our bodies, ourselves, our environments, the human and more than human worlds all need care, and in that shared vulnerability, finding that solidarity and the potential for a new ethics. And the project specifically looks at the role of art, what art works and artists do to take care, and considers the way that artists work from a range of different disciplinary perspectives. So the CARE project is not just artists, but also people who are working with environmental ethics, for example, sustainability, death literacy, animal advocacy, aged care, disability advocacy, and so on. And the way that the project has been unfolding has been through a series of exhibitions, kind of small scale. The idea is that they're very inclusive. They're not, based in the big metropolis necessarily. They're regional. They're not in big institutions, but in much more grassroots kind of community style institutions. And some of those projects have been very much about working small scale with community and seeing the relations between, caring for country, caring for environment, caring for others, caring for self. So in the context of what we're facing today, the project just seems so even more timely than it was. And the kind of comments that I wanted to make around COVID and art, that the qualities that artists have had to kind of hone in order to sustain themselves and survive in neoliberal times, like resourcefulness, creativity, connection, and collectivism, have proven to be some of the most effective ways to actually combat the crisis. These are the kind of qualities that are, being drawn on. The other thing that's really interesting is, of course, in social isolation, we found an explosion in kind of creativity and making, as people kind of cope with that isolation, turning to art, to making art for meaning, expression, connection, but also, of course, turning to consuming creative work in droves in order to, we talked a little bit about that in a couple of the previous sessions around how art can be such a consolation. So not only is it something that allows you to be mindful and to reach a kind of like potentially equanimity when you're facing crisis, but also it allows you distraction, it allows you entertainment, it allows you pleasure at times when you're facing existential crisis. And the pandemic, as Eleonor already mentioned, has foregrounded what is essential. An overused word in these times, I've got to say, and revealed that essential to be care for others, care for self. In Victoria, which is the state of Australia in which I live, today is like the first day that we've had a little bit of relaxation, but it's been the four things that we're allowed to do. We're all related to care. We're, allowed to go out and buy food, allowed to exercise, self-care, allowed to compassionate visits and medical care, and then work in education. And we've been encouraged by the state to be attentive, responsive, competent, and responsible, to prioritise the collective as opposed to to see ourselves as interdependent rather than a group of autonomous individuals. And of course, that attentive, responsive, competent, and responsible are the definitions of care according to one of the key theorists, Joan Tronto.
And yet, I'm coming in. We are over. We are in 7 minutes. Can you wrap up?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm sorry. I hate to do this, but I was asked to.
Okay, I'll just wrap up by saying that, the flip side of that is, of course, the lockdown has actually caused people who work in the arts and creative industries to suffer huge loss of work. They're actually one of the most vulnerable groups, already having been vulnerable in a precarious neoliberal state, and yet they're the ones who are facing probably the most severe challenges at the moment as a workforce. And yet it's that creativity and that resilience that actually we will actually need more than ever in order to reimagine our future in the aftermath of this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jaqueline. I'm again apologizing that I had to bluntly
Not at all.
stop. As the second speaker, we would want to invite Mollard. Are you on? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that's a relief.
Welcome, Blandine.
Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Blandine Mollard. I work in the research team of the European Institute for Gender Equality, AtGender. Maybe some of you have visited us when the conference took place in Vilnius 3 years ago, I think. Today, I would like to talk about our ongoing work on care, and especially one of our specific projects that we are doing for the German presidency. That is looking at how unpaid care is shared in the EU and with which consequences. So to give you a bit of context, because this context is quite important, one of our responsibilities at AtGender is to monitor the Beijing Platform for Action and how it's implemented in the EU. And one of the ways we're doing this is by looking at one area in particular that is selected by the country who has the presidency in the EU. And in this case, it's Germany, and they have selected unpaid care. They have selected the area of women and the economy, and they want specifically to look at unpaid care and how the fact that it's unequally shared is affecting women on the labor market. So the design of that research and the research activities took place before COVID hit. But so they're not really reflecting the ways in which the care provision is affected by the pandemic. But I think it will provide some interesting insights for EU leaders on how care is really undervalued, whether it's paid or unpaid. And the findings will be discussed in one of Germany's presidency conference in November, that they have decided to focus on gender and gender equality in the coronavirus context. So just to give you a bit of a sense of what we are looking at in this project, we have 4 main research questions. The first one is how unequal distribution of care might be supporting or aggravating inequalities in pay on the labor market. So is a gender pay gap affecting women who have particularly intense care responsibility disproportionately? We know that's the case. The second question is how care is being externalized by families in the EU. How do they access services outside the family to meet their care needs? What are the limits? The third question, what are the limits of this externalization, especially when it's promoted a bit of a strategy to overcome unequal sharing? And some of the limits that we are seeing is, of course, availability of services, affordability, quality, adequacy. We have held some focus group discussion that's shown that external services never really fully solve the tensions around unequal sharing, and that the mental load of organizing the care, of coordinating with care providers falls on women, and it's a heavy task indeed. The fourth question is the fact of focusing so much on externalization of care implies the availability of high quality care services, and this sector heavily relies on women's work. In the EU, it's actually one of the biggest employer of women. So we want to look at how much of this work relies on domestic workers, for example, without proper status, with no access to social protection. What kind of working conditions are being offered in that sector? How is that work being compensated? And we found, for example, that in the education and healthcare sector, we are seeing levels of vertical segregation that are higher than in other sectors. Despite the fact that it's a women-dominated sector, women are still less likely to be in managerial position than in other sectors that are. So it's easier to access managerial position if you work in finance as a woman than in health. So we're seeing very high level of gender segregation, vertical. So really briefly, those are some of the issues that the research report will touch upon. We're also focusing on some policy recommendations. So if the discussion could go also in that direction, getting some of your ideas about what you consider the #1 recommendations for EU leaders when it comes to care. This would be really great if we could discuss that. But at the moment, we're focusing on investment in the care sector, pay transparency measures, working conditions, of course, in the care sector, combat measures against horizontal and vertical gender segregation, and implementation of the work-life balance directive. So this directive that was adopted last year, and that includes new rights for carers and people with caring responsibilities. And we're a bit concerned that with the crisis, the transposition of those new rights will be put on the back burner and will not be made a priority. So to finish, I just want to say that the public health crisis that we are seeing at the moment is reminding us, I don't think many of us needed the reminder, that care is essential to well-running societies, whether it's done for pay or informally, but it's also casting a very unflattering light on the working conditions of people in the front line, the cleaners, the nurses, the personal carers. Our report on the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action has shown then that austerity measures that were adopted in reaction of the 2008 economic crisis have had a very lasting effect on women employment conditions by downsizing the public sectors, who was a big employer of women, and also by cutting social benefits. I mean, you're very familiar with this, this phenomenon. So my question now is, how do we ensure that those mistakes are not being repeated as we go into another potentially even graver crisis? So to avoid that the people who are the very people who are putting their lives on at risk at the moment to safeguard our health will not be the one that are also the hardest hit by the austerity measures that will follow. So this is what I wanted to highlight in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, and thank you also to keeping to the time limit. Before I give over to our third speaker, Aniko, Gregor, I also wanted to invite all of you to share your questions for the discussions, because after the fourth presentation, that means Daniela's presentation, who comes on after Aniko, we will have a little break to take in questions and go through them to give us some intellectual space for breathing and sort of catching up with the points that are being put on. I would also ask the presenters not to respond to the questions as they speak, but keep it to the discussion. So Aniko, would you want to take the floor? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for organizing this panel. In the next couple of 5 minutes, I would like to talk briefly about the results of the preliminary research project. Actually, it is a pilot project, so I'm going to be very empirical in a very limited sense, in which we made an attempt to shed light on how COVID-19 crisis and the different lockdown measures affected the domestic division of labor in Hungarian households. So this was our main research question: what happened after the lockdown with the division of labor, the gender division of labor in households and families? So we conducted an online survey research between 6th and 14th of April this year, which means that that was the 4th week of the semi-lockdown measures. So after the introduction of different semi-lockdown measures, which meant that and still means that there is no school, no kindergarten, and the stay-at-home campaign is still very on. Now they are going to revoke some measures, but not all of them. So we conducted this online survey with the sample of almost 2,000 respondents, and the survey is, or the sample is representative to high school or college educated internet users, Hungarian internet users, who raise children under 14 years of age, which practically means that almost half of the sample raised child under 6 years of age. So this is the internal structure of the sample. And the field of research is Hungary, and what you should know about Hungary, regardless of all the political things, that if we take the gender regime, what Hungary has right now, it can be characterized as a constantly shifting gender regime into a more domestic neoliberal gender regime from the previous state socialist and more subsidized type of gender regime in terms of care and care work. And the unpaid reproductive work, which is mostly done by women, it is still legitimated by traditional expectations towards gender roles, both on policy level and attitudes as well. So our results, now I'm going to talk about our results. So the first result what we got is that the volume of possible help in child rearing outside the household has significantly dropped, which is not a surprise because of the lockdowns and the curfews, by 20 to 33%. So since grandparents, other family members, and in a much minor amount paid help was not available, of course, the care work increased in the household. And the ratio of people who help that or who feel that they have actually no help in care has actually doubled. And now it is around 10%. So 10% of people with children under the age of 14, they feel that they have actually no help at all in care. And of course, women, lower educated women and single parents are more likely to feel like that. It's even more higher. So it's around 16 to 20% among them. The other interesting result was that 7 out of 10 people experience change in their working circumstances in terms of schedule or location. Home office is not the majority, even, or those who are in home office, they are not in the majority, even if we talk about upper educated, so people with diploma or high school degree, 47% of women and 1/3 of men said that they are in home office right now. This is another interesting gender gap or difference, and of course it might cause that women again are doing a higher percentage of household work because they are the ones who are at home. But the most interesting result was that actually men take part more now in childcare, elderly care, and household tasks before compared to the amount they did before COVID-19. But the amount by which the original gender gap decreased is not that high. It is only 10%. So yes, the gender gap has been decreased, but we can expect more. And fathers with diploma take part more in the fun project of child caring, which is again well known from other researches. So now they play and study more with the kids. However, fathers with high school degree, they take part more in feeding or other physical caretaking processes. So those who are conducting research on the field of fatherhood, again, it can be an interesting insight. And it is also interesting or important to highlight that women reported 5 times higher than men that it would be great if my partner contributed even more to childcare and household duties. So women are expecting men to take part, and 5 times greater. I think it's a big difference. And 80% of women reported that they still feel tension, still, of course, not still, but in these times they feel even more tension between paid and unpaid work. And also men, 60% of men also reported similar feelings. So these were the main results, and I, at the end of my presentation, I would like to clarify that this project was funded by the Central European University Quick Research Grant, and I am just one member of this research group. Besides me, Eva Fodor from CEU, Julia Koltai from CEU and Hungarian Academy of Science, and Eszter Kovács from Eötvös University, where I also teach in Hungary. So we all conducted this research, and the publication is in progress. We would like to provide to the scientific community a quick report, hopefully on the scientific blog of Gender and Society. So I'm gonna write my email address into the chat. So if you are interested in my short presentation, you can reach me out, and stay tuned for the publication. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Oh, go on, Eleonor.
Go ahead, Katerina.
I just wanted to thank Aniko and invite Daniela to present, and I see that you are already writing comments and questions. That is really awesome. So we want more. So thank you, Aniko, and Daniela, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I'm a PhD student of Charles University, and my study is autoethnographical. It stems from my situation of a so-called significantly disabled woman, dependent on round-the-clock personal assistance service. Being a Slovak living in the Czech Republic, I'm financially supported by Slovak social system. As there is no other institutional support, all the work process with personal assistance is done exclusively by me as a user. My research field has been created by my living with about 40 assistants who are changing their shifts in my flat every few hours. They're involving in the service in irregular lengths and frequency of visits according to their own preferences creates an environment of uncertainty for me. However, the current social system do not permit any fully equivalent alternative. Both states do not accept personal assistance as an appreciated job with social security, pension, holidays, or sick pay. And one of its consequences is a huge turnover of assistants. The coronavirus situation has brought a change in some of these respects. A fear of endangering so-called vulnerable groups had led to many contentious measures. For example, in Slovakia, seniors could shop only for 2 hours a day on weekdays, and people coming from abroad had to undergo a 14-day state quarantine. On the other hand, so-called frontline people, such as medical staff or salespersons, were morally appreciated. Users of personal assistance have been largely omitted in most of these groups. Their living or studying abroad was not taken into consideration, except including them from the duty of state quarantine. It was also forgotten that their exposure to increase the risk of infection, and not only because of disability itself, but because of high number of constantly changing assistants in their privacy, put them also in the front line without any possibility of choice. A strong emphasis on self-quarantine recommended to all is not feasible for such people unless the social system settings are changed. The Slovak government's response to this situation has been the decision that family members can be assistants for up to 10 hours a day, which was not before. Even if it applies only temporarily during the crisis period, the social office has not informed users about this for many life-saving possibility. It claims that it is not obliged to inform about changes in the law. Many assistants lost their sources of income due to the users who turn to their families instead, or due to employers in their other jobs. Like many other people dependent on the help of the others, I also experienced anxiety and fear of losing assistance at the beginning of the crisis. Some assistants gradually stopped coming to me, claiming that they did not want to risk infecting me. They knew I had no choice and someone would have to come anyway. And I knew that in case of my illness, there would be no one to assist. This threat was greater than the disease itself, but the government has never reflected to the situation in order to increase the financial aid for assistants and motivate them to stay with us simply. Paradoxically, it has been the COVID-19 crisis alone that has saved me somehow. Due to the loss of employment and limited leisure activities, some people came with sudden willingness to assist more often. The often difficult situation has led to the possibility of reducing the number of my assistants from 40 to the current 18 people per month in my flat. Even so, self-quarantine remains a dream or an illusion for me. The situation will not improve in the future. Due to the loss of any income, regular and frequent personal assistance has only become an act of emergency in temporary crisis. The Slovak government has already rejected this year's increase in the personal assistance allowance, which will force assistants to find a better job and users to bear high turnover of assistants in their privacy again. In fact, the impossibility of self-quarantine has revealed a demonstration of what personal assistance users are generally exposed to. Thus, the dream of self-quarantine during the corona crisis is just a part of dreaming about truly independent life under usual circumstances. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you. So we are coming to the little break and sort of a moment where we can take questions and ask our presenters to respond to whatever questions you have shared over the chat box. I have seen that there is already a sort of a discussion happening independently of the presentation. So I would suggest that perhaps there has been some clarification and comprehension questions coming to Aniko's presentation. If you don't mind, could you actually again, like so the question was asking about the percentage of care. Could you just share with everybody what you have been clarifying in the chat box? Would that be okay, Aniko?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for your questions here. So Magda asked me that this 10% I was talking about, is this the total amount of the person, it is the total ratio of the work or care work what men do? No, actually it's not. So there was an original gender gap between the gender division of labor, and it has been decreased slightly by this 10%. So the way how we measured it, it was a subjective scale because it is very, very difficult. Time scale surveys usually do that. They ask the actual amount of time with the diary, how much or how many minutes were spent on this or that. So we approached this question with a subjective question that on a 1 to 7 scale, what was the amount, what the respondents felt that what was the amount of the share, what he or she did or does right now. And this gap has been decreased by 10%, which is not much. So that's why, so the lion's share is still done by women. But but what it was surprising for us, because in Hungary we didn't even expect this. So that's why it was an interesting result for us.
Thank you so much. Then there are a couple questions coming back to Blandine. And I think actually after Blandine responds, I think they relate to all the presenters and we can open them to a broader discussion. So
yes, thank you, Katerina.
I hope I will not sort of blunder too much if I say that there are several questions that seem to be interested in related aspects and how much your project is covering the position of women coming outside of Europe and also the inequalities between the state socialist and Western Europe on sort of this sort of continuity of distinction between the East and the West, and how much that is actually reflected in your project and how much you are exploring that. So if you want to respond to that.
Yes, as Eleonor knows, before joining IGE, I worked for the International Migration Agency, and I worked a lot on the issue of global care change. So this is something that we're quite familiar, and we will highlight in the report. I was now typing frenetically an answer about the statistics and how they do not account for a very relevant population of domestic workers who lack a regular migration status. They are not accounted anywhere, but at least we can rely on some very patchy information from different countries. So there is a bit of information from, for example, the labor force survey that tells us the prevalence of, how many domestic workers were born outside the EU. Those are regular declared workers, so it gives us an indication. And for women who lack this regular status, we need to rely on other source of data. So it's true, statistics do not reveal their presence, their contribution to this work. So we have to find other ways.
Thank you so much, Blandine. I perhaps wanted to ask other presenters on the panel, on the first half of the panel, if the questions also resonate with your research and the issues that you talked about. I know that Daniela has previously talked about how people coming outside of Europe are potentially more willing to do assistance because the way that the labor market discriminates against them. I don't know if Aniko, also you have looked at how the lockdown has affected people from Hungary that might be going to be care workers, or vice versa if the care workers are not coming to Hungary. Do we perhaps want to go in the order you spoke? So if Jaqueline wanted to jump in, then Aniko and then Daniela.
Yeah, should we do that? Yes.
Okay, Jaqueline, did I read your suggestion? You don't want to?
Yeah, no, I don't have something to contribute to that particular question, so I'll pass on that thing.
Aniko?
Okay, then I continue. I have some ideas on that, because what we can see is that women with so lower educated women already started losing their job in Hungary, and it is quite clear from every statistics, either coming from state or other survey researches that were conducted in the past few weeks. And yes, it might have an effect that these women will find their place, or it's difficult to say. It's a different topic, but what we can see that, for example, the sex webcam industry is boosting in Hungary, and sex work industry will benefit from these women. So it's not even the care, or not even the care migration, what I expect to be increased, but the most problematic part, which is sex industry.
Thank you. Daniela, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I could mention that it's really important not to omit any side included in the care process, because I mean both sides have their difficult situations, why they are endangered by the current situation, either on the basis of economical reasons, both from the health point of view. And this cooperation is endangering both sides, people coming from outside of someone's privacy. If we imagine being in the period of quarantine, waiting and expecting and welcoming people in our privacy, it's probably not anything that many people would be happy for. Still, people depend on the round-the-clock assistance, have no other choice. People coming to assist are also endangered, and many of them, especially immigrants who came from outside of Europe and do not have stable jobs, are really dependent on the possibility to do any kind of job, because in current situations they are not able to find any stable job where they could be supported during the crisis. And these temporarily jobs were only for some short period of time, and in the period of crisis they are totally stopped, and they were cut from any possibility to survive. So these are very hard binaries, which however cannot be separated from each other, and I think it's needed to look at it from that point of view.
Thank you. There are several questions to Daniela. I'm so sorry, my connection seemed to be breaking up. Are you hearing me well now?
Well, it's okay, but the other connection seems to be breaking up.
Okay. So I was just mindful of time. There are several questions coming to Daniela and expressing the appreciation for the presentation. So perhaps I would just take one out of the several coming to Daniela's, and there is a suggestion or question that is asking if you think that thinking about both care receivers and caretakers as the frontline workers would be helpful, and whether you are seeing some form of political alliance or coalition building that would potentially be a force to change how we as a society value and think about care.
I definitely think so. And I would say especially it's somehow invisible part of society closed at homes, while it's not that institutionalized and open to the public and entrance of media or whatever. It still stays very closed from the view of people and even researchers or academics. So it's really important to bring that issue and talk about, and also to yes, to mention that these people are people because they are exposed to the danger in a very invisible way. If that's what I was exposed to answer to.
Thank you. Thank you for all your questions in the chat box. Thank you for the engagement with the presentation. Thank you for the presenters. We are coming to the second half that Eleonor will present. But perhaps before we give over to the presenters again, I wanted to make sure that all of you are here. I had troubles to see Brook, Richardson, and Kristin Papcunova. Are you here? Could you come forward and let us know that you are here and ready to present?
I'm here and ready to present.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Oh, hi there. You've got to do it.
Decode the name. And okay, and Kristin is here too. Okay.
Okay, so should we can play? Yes. Okay. So welcome to the second half, in a sense, after the very fruitful discussion and comments. And so I'm very pleased to present Eleonor Jupp and Sophie Bowlby. And I've known Sophie for many, many years, a long time back in our feminist geography days. Anyhow, so Eleonor will be presenting. So she can present now if she wants to give where she's from and the title, and then away we go.
Great. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Hi. Yeah, I did say I was going to have to show some slides, but actually I looked at the guidelines that said not to, so that's absolutely fine. So I'm Eleonor Jupp. I'm from the University of Kent, and this is a very brief summary of a working paper that I'm working with Sophie Bowlby on, who is out there in cyberspace as well. So I'm hoping she can join in might be able to join in the discussion as well. And the title of our working paper, which we hope to have online somewhere soon, is called Stay Safe, Stay Home, Shifting Geographies of Home and Care under COVID-19. And in this paper, we're drawing on a book which came out last year with Policy Press that I have got here. It's going to be on my slide. And the book is called The New Politics of Home, Housing, Gender and Care in Times of Crisis. And that book is talking about austerity and the crisis of austerity primarily, but talks about the need to focus on the scale of home and household in understanding economic and political change. And the book looks to sort of conceptualize how we might think, look at the scale of home and house and think about how bigger kinds of crises are then played out through more everyday or domestic crises. So what I'm going to say in the next few minutes is just talk about some of the ideas from the book and how we're sort of, we also worked with Jane Franklin and Sarah Marie Hall, I should say as well, and how they might be applied to coronavirus conditions. So in the UK, and it's great to hear about other contexts, it's really, really interesting, because I think part of what's happening at the moment, I feel, is we're being pushed into our sort of national politics and policy too much probably, but in the UK, we've been in lockdown for just under 2 months. And home has never loomed so large in public discourse. And it has this sort of patriotic quality, I think, the way in which home is evoked by policymakers and politicians at the moment. So this is a quote from Matt Hancock, who's the health minister. Home is now the front line. And in this national effort, working together, we can defeat this disease. And stay home has been put up on lots of, it's been one of the key sort of political slogans. So the scale of home and household is now being brought into direct relationship with the scale of the nation state. And within this imagination, the home space is unproblematically figured as a straightforward place of safety and care, as well as now education and work, as workplaces and schools are shut down. And it's somehow being figured as a simple or straightforward instruction, you just stay home. And there's discussions in the moment in the UK that we're moving away from that message and it's getting too complicated. But while, of course, home is a powerful and maybe straightforward idea, it's a much, much more complex and messy reality, as we've been starting to think about already. So I've been talking to Sophie about the idea that when the home space comes under pressure, and we might think about this more broadly as well, when we press down on the surface of things somehow in a metaphorical way, and their qualities are revealed. So I think issues are being made visible. Our attention is being drawn to issues which are already there about home and household, but are becoming more apparent as the intensity of the pressures on home and household increases. So I've just got 3 points to make, which again are much broader, really relate to chapters in the book, so they're much broader sets of points about home and household. And the first one is really about the complexity of home and the way that a home is a sort of layering of material, emotional, and economic circumstances, and also and therefore we cannot just think in a straightforward way about a home or household. People may fit into different homes or none. Home may be in the past or future. The home space may be threatening and insecure in a range of ways, depending on our relationship with, our economic relationship with home. We're renting, for example. And it may be insecure in emotional, material or economic terms, particularly for women. We've seen a huge increase in domestic violence cases in the UK, and I'm sure elsewhere as well. And even when not directly threatening to us, perhaps there's a sort of huge burden, we talked about care already, I think, in holding together these different layers of home, the emotional, embodied and material sort of needs of a home and household. And research on austerity has shown us that in times of crisis, it's often women that take on that role of sort of coping, of sort of keeping the ship on the road, you know, whatever the metaphor is, keeping the show on the road. And there's lots of pressure on the home and household. And I think we're seeing this now under coronavirus conditions. We can see, we talked about, you know, a drop in women's academic output. Women are doing this burden of you know, education, care, and all those sort of messy layers that home and household work now involves. Secondly, in terms of inequalities, and of course this already touches on that idea that home is a very unequal space, and particularly in terms of the ways in which the home space may enable care or not. And Sophie's got a chapter in the book where she talks about the need for an intersectional approach to care and the home, drawing on inequalities around class, gender and ethnicity, but also a range of other material, financial and relational resources that the home space may offer or not. And these include access to formal and informal forms of care, the systems by which housing may be accessed, but also the dwelling and the design of the home space itself, how that may or may not facilitate care. So things like an outside space at the moment, things like enough rooms. We need to think about the sort of affordances that the home space may give in relation to care in this intersectional way in terms of inequalities. And lastly, I think the last thing which the coronavirus has made us think about is the way in which home life, in order for home life to really be livable, it's not just about being in a domestic space, it's about those connections beyond, the connections, the relationships, the other spaces which normally, you know, we would be able to go in and out of. And, you know, I think the lockdown is raising all these questions about how we reach out beyond the home space. How can we access those kinds of connections beyond the everyday? And one answer is clearly digital space, as we're doing now. But we also feel the importance of very local living areas is being revealed afresh if we're allowed out in a kind of limited way in our local spaces, which not everybody is. But there seems to be a new kind of granular attention being drawn for us to the affordances of neighbourhoods as well, both in terms of potentialities around solidarity and care on a very, very localised level, but also perhaps the limitations in terms of overcrowded spaces, sharing with cars and so on. And we're being thrown into new kinds of material engagement, I think, with our own very local living areas. So to finish off, I think I've gone over time a little bit. I think coronavirus is showing us all these things about the home space and about inequalities and care, and it's making visible the many things that we already knew were there, but they're sort of being revealed afresh. So we're trying to think about, you know, can we pay attention to what is being revealed at the moment? Are those in power looking and listening? And what can we do to think about them improving in the future?
Thanks very much. Thank you. Sophie, do you want to just show yourself? Is it possible just so everybody can see you at all? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, are you talking to Sophie Bowlby or me?
Bowlby, yes, it's all right.
Okay.
Sorry, there's lots of Sophies, I think. Okay, I think we better move on, but many thanks, Eleanor and Sophie, for that work, which I think is extremely pertinent, and we're very perceptive before the current virus. Okay, so we now move on to Aneta. If she could.
Yes, hello.
Yep. Hello, Aneta.
Hello. Thank you for letting me be here. And my presentation is, I would say, a brief voice raised spontaneously, because this presentation concerns the current, I would say, political situation in Poland. And this situation, in my opinion, is disastrous. We are heading towards crisis point. As we all know, coronavirus is a huge threat to women's reproductive health around the world. The pandemic deepens equality and gender injustice. According to the Guttmacher Institute, the possibility of obtaining basic services in the field of sexual safety and medical care, including prenatal tests and legal abortions, are falling significantly now. People are dying. Patients with cancer, heart diseases, and pregnant women have difficult access to doctors. In Poland, the pandemic crisis has become a temptation for the ruling party, right-wing party, by the way, to restrict human rights. Instead of supporting people, Poland's parliament considered last April regressive legislation that would restrict reproductive health and rights and put the lives of women at risk. And in my opinion, it is an example of the policy of uncaring and disregard for women's rights as well. Abortion is worse pandemic than coronavirus, claimed a right-wing activist presenting in the Polish parliament the bill called Stop Abortion. It was on 15th of April. And this project, Stop Abortion, involves a total abortion ban in any case, including the case of severe and irreversible damage to the fetus. The speaker of the bill said, "Abortion is worse than coronavirus. It brings more casualties and they are all deadly." And this statement is a strong ethical and axiological argument. It means not only neglecting the threats arising from the spread of coronavirus, but also it means an ideological dispute over the value of life and the priority of care. So in the face of the pandemic, the question now is asked, whose existence is more valuable now? The fetus or the woman and the living people? And my concern is who deserves care in the pandemic situation? The answer is not women. Recent events in Poland show that to be a woman, to have a woman's body, means to be put at risk. A woman does not exist in the light of abortion law. She is treated as an incubator. Women's lives, their health, are compromised. They don't have the external resources to support their lives and health. And voting on a bill that would have enacted a total abortion ban, even in the case of defects in the fetus, is a blow to millions of women in Poland and their families. It is even more scandalous because in the face of the pandemic, the society is deprived of the opportunity to protest because the street protests are not possible. And this case shows that issues of self-care and caring are fundamental in the discussion about human dignity and subjectivity. And women must take care of themselves because no one cares for them and their health. Their well-being, their rights to decide, are not protected enough. And the self-care, as I understood, is about finding ways to exist in a world that denies women their rights. So it must be a way to resist a violent and oppressive culture. the ethics of self-care means choosing and empowered narratives about oneself, about one's experiences of vulnerability and care scarcity. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Aneta. Sure it will spark some questions here. So we have
if I can come in, oh, so sorry. I have a suggestion. And sorry, my water is gone.
Yes, I was.
Kristin has sent a video. She is unable to join us due to weather and internet being down. So I downloaded the video. I think we could see it if I share the screen with you.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask Brook, who was supposed to be the next presenter, if I could jump in and share Kristin's video, since I will have to leave to go on to the dissertation defense. Would that be okay if we made this change in the lineup? So sorry. Okay, so wish me luck. I will try to play and share the screen. Okay. Share screen.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Eleonor, you would have to allow me to use.
So I need to click share screen in that case. Yep.
No, because you would have to have downloaded the video.
Okay, then I think we've got a bit of a problem.
Okay.
You could make.
Can I make
Katerina the host?
It could be made. Is it possible for it to be made available in some way through? Is there a link that people could watch it? Not now, but maybe.
Is one quicker way might be if in the participants you might have the function to allow me to share video.
But that will take us, I think, some time because I'm not sure. Yeah.
So why don't I forward you the email?
Yeah.
You will download it and then possibly share, and we'll ask Brook to come on as was planned. Yeah. I'm so sorry for this.
In that way, everybody will have access to it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So sorry. Okay, I'm muting myself again.
I'm going ahead then. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks so much, Aneta, for that. Well, thanks everyone for having me and for organizing this panel. And I think what I'm going to say follows really nicely after what Aneta just said, because I mean, obviously the context in different there's such different contexts in different places. So I actually have kind of a different, hearing her presentation made me think differently. But anyways, so here I go. So I'm an adjunct faculty at Brock University, which is in Canada, in Ontario. And then I also am the president of the Association of Early Childhood Educators of Ontario. So my work is in childcare and child protection systems, which was what my original presentation was going to be about, but I kind of has nothing to do with that anymore. But I do just want to say, you know, those systems function very differently from each other and have both obviously been deeply impacted by COVID-19. Not just now, but as we move forward too. I mean, there's been a huge shift to non-standard work and a complete lack of childcare, of course, for children of all ages. And then in terms of child protection, the massive tensions between justice, risk, and care are even more pronounced than they were before this. So I guess I'm trying to take a little bit more of a positive spin and a political focus. And I'm just kind of beginning with two overarching questions and then kind of explain my thinking a little bit behind them. So, I mean, as Eleonor stated at the outset of this panel, you know, has COVID provided an opportunity to re-examine the superfluous positioning of care in contemporary neoliberal times? And if so, does this create possibilities to see caregivers, predominantly women, racialized, marginalized, and classed, whose care labor has been and continues to be largely invisible to the formal market economy and functioning of society? So my own thinking is really influenced by, which other presenters have talked about, Joan Troncho's work on A Caring Democracy. And so this is she says, the purpose of economic life is to support care, not the other way around, which is something I'm sure we're all familiar with. And I've been using this quote for, several years in many of the projects I've been working on. But you know, it's kind of come into a collective consciousness in a way that I think is really unique. I mean, only a few months ago, it would have been unimaginable that the economy would grind to a halt while the care of human beings and those providing care would be front page news every day, which has been, you know, my experience in Ontario. So, oops, sorry, I just went. So COVID has exposed the vulnerabilities and fragilities of healthcare and social systems, which all individual persons and a democratic society rely. So Kate's assertion that collective action is not a matter of choice, but a necessity has been experienced by all of us. Including powerful figures in a public way. So the illness of Boris Johnson and in England, and my jurisdiction, our Premier Doug Ford's mother-in-law, who was in a nursing home and contracted COVID-19, was a sobering reality check that a public can and does exist. So Ford went as far as to bring in the military to care for seniors in long-term care homes with COVID-19 outbreaks, which is still currently happening. So these two politicians and their supporters, previously committed to reducing government through gutting health and social programs, were personally and publicly impacted in ways that made care as a public resource impossible to ignore. And I mean, COVID has also made care beyond health and senior care directly related to COVID visible. We have all been in meetings interrupted by toddlers and teenagers alike. Literally, children appear in meetings of Parliament and other live broadcasts as schools and childcares remain closed. So the value of public school systems and childcare services beyond formal education outcomes, which has been the focus in the neoliberal social political climate, has been pronounced and visible again. The idea that that care is a public resource rather than a family matter or woefully undervalued market commodity has emerged in the collective consciousness in a new way. Kate's seemingly revolutionary idea that we are inevitably dependent and inextricably interdependent has become a central component of virtually everyone's daily life and lived experience, even as we remain physically isolated from the majority of people in our lives and the majority of people who care for us and we care for. So COVID is not going away anytime soon, but the crisis is slowing. My fear is that the humility this virus has instantiated in both our elected officials and society more broadly may dissolve as quickly as it was asserted. Some governments are pushing to return to the neoliberal economic model, which has, in many ways, held women hostage for decades. So if the answer is yes to the two questions I posed at the beginning of this presentation, that the pandemic has created a greater space and place to see care and the value of care work, the next logical question is, how do we ensure that this public space is not lost amidst efforts to get back to normal? Or how do we keep care and the women who provide it central rather than peripheral as we build a new normal? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brook. So our last speaker is Sophia Kier-Byfield. Is she here?
Yeah. Hiya.
That's Sophie. Oh, right. I could see you all the time. I didn't realize what you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks to everyone for your wonderful talks so far. It's been so enlightening to get all these different perspectives on the situation. It's really wonderful. And thanks, of course, to the organizers. I'm going to be speaking about a reading group which I started in 2017 and which has grown into a sort of collaborative project since then. So it's usually an in-person reading group in the Danish city of Aarhus, and we host public talks, screenings and workshops on a regular basis with different sort of groups coming in and out. It's always a new kind of formation each time that we have an event. And of course, the arrival of COVID-19 has challenged us with new questions about how we should continue. So I'm just going to sort of detail a few of those today in the next few minutes. So first of all, I think it's a huge privilege to be able to even kind of have this conversation, you know, to sort of contemplate how to carry on with usual activities. running a public initiative like the reading group and all the events we put on is very time consuming. Unlike a closed book club, for example, it requires programming and publicity, communications and coordination. The working group, we meet multiple times to discuss our planning, but this is time we're really lucky to have. We're not key workers risking our health for others, nor do we have dependents. We're all sort of under 30, students and researchers, for example. But the aim of our work is to be a community-based learning project. So to keep going during the pandemic felt really crucial, even though it's only a small contribution. So providing regular online opportunities to keep reading and talking and to keep imagining other worlds was a caring gesture we felt we could offer those who might be isolated from their social circles or perhaps intense family dynamics and under new pressures. A reading group program is also a kind of feminist curriculum, collaboratively generated and broad in scope, and we wanted to keep building this resource at this time. We decided to choose reading not linked to the pandemic, and in doing so, we're of course exercising another privilege of being able to ignore the realities outside, but we felt it was a really important act of self-care to kind of take a break from this coverage. These considerations have not been without limitations. The internet has the capacity to democratize learning and sort of increase access, but of course not everyone has a decent internet connection or even a device. I've been hearing from my neighbour across the road, for example, who works in the local school, and she's been delivering computers. Just to know, I'm based in the UK at the moment, so that's not about Denmark, but I think that's a global issue, you know, of distribution of electronics and access to the internet. So not everyone has that. Furthermore, there's been moments of really sort of intense personal fatigue with trying to keep the reading group going. For example, in the minutes before logging on to the first call, so many negative thoughts passed through my mind, such as, why do I create so much extra work for myself? Already doing a full-time PhD. I really can't be bothered to moderate the meeting today. I don't have anything to say. So these thoughts are all going through one's mind before kind of going in to facilitate a session. And then afterwards, I felt really tired, bleary-eyed from focusing so hard on the screen, trying to keep an eye on who's got their hand up, read body language. That's extremely difficult, obviously, as everyone who's been trying to teach online has probably learned. I felt worried if people had enjoyed themselves and felt seen and heard. And I felt really ashamed about a moment of interjection. So again, whilst online learning has a lot of democratization possibilities, it's also very tricky. Another challenge we faced was about what platform to use. So we had been using as a working group Google Hangouts, and we were under the impression, I think from Googling around, that you could have 25 people in a session. But during our first group call, we realized that 10 was actually the maximum when someone wrote that they couldn't get in. They couldn't actually join the call. So group numbers have always been a challenge in our in-person events. We host in a small gallery, and sometimes we've had 30 people, and to try and manage a conversation between that many people is really challenging. But having technology essentially close the door on someone who we wanted to have in was not something we'd anticipated. So deciding to abandon our responsibility for this person and carry on for the sake of the people inside, it became clear to us that 10 people was actually the most we could manage comfortably. And this accident helped us achieve our ideal of a small group where everyone could be attended to, but it was of course at the cost of leaving someone out. So this is making us think about how we go forward, how many people should we have in? We're keeping with the number of 10 because it's just so much more enjoyable and intimate. But having a smaller group in the online discussions has made us think extra carefully about other means of engagement. Dialogue is celebrated in critical pedagogy discourses, but feminist pedagogies have also paid attention to those who remain quiet, who need more time to think, or for whom other forms of expression might be preferable. At our usual meetings, people often say they're just here to listen. An intimate group number, so for example, that group of 10, can induce more pressure to speak, especially when the group composition is new. And with each of our meetings, it's always a new group because we're a public initiative. So we've now set up a Goodreads page. Goodreads is like a social media site for readers. And for each text, we're going to encourage a kind of more durational discussion. So having this forum, we hope, will provide more time to communicate thoughts, essentially a kind of caregiving to our own thoughts, which creates, more time to think, more time to communicate ideas, but also another resource of written ideas and contributions, rather than just this fleeting in-person discussion. So we're hoping that can generate something. So finally, in Denmark, the lockdown is lifting. Public art venues like the one where we usually host our events will soon be open again, but we argue that it is important to keep staying home if and when one can. We are going to keep a strict online-only policy for the foreseeable future, as we want to show solidarity with those who still fear going out and getting back to normal, whatever that means. Beyond the health-related factors, remaining online has many other benefits, as I've tried to show today. In our last meeting, participants were from Denmark, the UK, the Netherlands, Egypt, and Italy. So those who've left Denmark but used to be there, living there or studying there, including myself, we can participate again, and we can have this kind of border crossing discussion now that we're online. So even when we do eventually host our in-person events again, we hope to keep our online presence too, because it's shown us new possibilities, both for exercising and learning about caring, careful pedagogies, rather than being a restriction.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Sophie. Okay, so because Kristin has posted the link to her video and she's unable to make it, so far in the chat box, what we mainly have is people being supportive to each other, particularly around the Polish question. Aneta, I'm glad that you've received all this support, and I think, that'd be great. I mean, it's what's so wonderful is to hear what's going on across Europe. Otherwise, there's people being posting stuff. So I think we can go on beyond 2:30 if we want to. But so if anybody maybe wants to ask a question that they haven't placed in the chat box, because as I say, there aren't any questions as such. They're really people giving support, keep in contact, this is, please send me and so on, rather than actual questions. So I don't know if anyone has got any questions that they'd like to put. So we've got a hand up from Sophia, and there was somebody, was it Eleanor had a hand up as well? Anyhow, Sophie, yeah.
Yeah, this was for the speaker about home. I've forgotten your name, sorry, and I can't see
Eleanor, or Ellie. Do you call yourself Ellie or Eleanor? It's
Ellie, you're right next to me on the chat. Sorry, sorry, I'm like scrolling on. Yeah, it's just something I've been thinking a lot about, like the issues you raised, and just this kind of realization that to have a safe home is such a huge privilege. Usually when we talk about privilege, and like, especially from an intersectional perspective, we think about like gender, race, class, and all these things. But I think this material emphasis of the home, not only in, you talked about space, economy, all of these different aspects. And I think the stay home directive, it's such a blanket, like one size fits all thing, like just stay home, when for some people, like you mentioned, staying home is really dangerous. And like the increase in obviously calls to domestic abuse helplines, all these different issues. So in terms of like putting pressure on the government and policymakers to kind of deal with this issue, because as we've talked about, COVID's not going away anytime soon. I was wondering if you had any ideas of how that would be dealt with. Is it that we just need to push for more shelters and like solutions, like other places for people to go, or if we need to redefine what home means at a kind of national, international level? Obviously different contexts, in different contexts is different realities, but I was just wondering what you think, how the pressure should be put, because I was thinking something like redefining what home is, and could be an answer.
Thank you. Yeah, it'd be nice if Sophie Bowlby could say something as well. So I'll just say something quickly, then maybe she can unmute herself. I can't see her. Anyway, yeah, I think Gosh, I think the first thing is just to try and pay attention to what's going on in homes. You know, I don't know about other contexts, but, you know, the politics that we're being fed in the UK is this big national stage, isn't it? And this statistics and this quite stage managed sense of politics. And we're seeing a bit of what's going on in hospitals. And lastly, you know, a bit starting to talk about care homes after that being ignored. But I feel that the everyday politics of coronavirus is so acute in so many actual households, and we just needs to be made visible. And that's that whole sort of public-private thing. And it's obviously harder because people are hidden away at the moment. And I don't know, I know in social work, they've temporarily removed the obligation to visit vulnerable, or to stay in touch with vulnerable families in the way that they normally would. So, you know, people going behind closed doors, things are being shut away. But at the same time, I think people's felt realities, things about home and household and the inequalities are becoming much more apparent. So I don't have a big answer, but I think it just shows us how unequally resources, like you say, are shared across households. Is Sophie there?
Oh, yes, I am. I think...
Welcome.
Thank you. Again, I think the inequalities are of access to home and the kind of home that you have access to, really important. Obviously, in the UK, there's been for a long time a lot of debate about inequalities in access to housing, because that's been a big political problem. But people don't think very much about what that housing is for, in a sense. It's often seen as an asset for the future, a financial asset. But I would like to argue for seeing housing very much more as a place for care. And, you know, that would affect clearly design, but also thought about the kind of resources there are locally available and access to others. And, you know, I was very struck by Daniela's presentation and, you know, the many people coming in. I mean, in one sense, it's good there are people coming in, but it's clearly a solution which doesn't think very much about the safety or comfort or independence of the person being given this resource of carers. And so that's all seems to me part of the need to completely rethink how we start to approach the home and the dwelling.
Can I say that, well, two things just following on from Sophie is, one is that I think there's been a lot of discussion in terms of care workers, of those working in residential homes, much less so, and in fact, they still remain tremendously invisible, the personal carers, because they can't keep tabs on them. In a sense, residential homes is much easier, and I think that's a real problem. Secondly, I just wanted to say that in terms of some of the progressive solutions that are being mooted, like a green agenda, some feminists have been very, very critical because it's about working at home. But when you work, you know, if the couple is working at home, who is doing all the work in the home? And this has been coming out quite clearly, precisely around the agenda of, say, academics, but others. And I think we need to be a bit careful, you could say, about I'm not being against a green agenda. I think we need to be wary and critical of what are some of the implications in relation to working at home, where both, you know, where the whole family is working at home.
Can I just say something about that? Because first of all, I'd like to strongly endorse what you said about domiciliary workers, the workers going into care in individual homes. Certainly here in Britain, and I don't know whether it's true in other European countries, but they're almost completely forgotten. There's hardly any discussion about either the risk to them or the risks to the people they care for.
Absolutely.
Oh, I've forgotten what was your second point, Eleonor?
Well, the second was the green agenda, not to say, because it was raised at a talk I was at, and we had a feminist, of course, spoke up immediately and said, oh, hold on, folks, there are these implications, you know, for the...
I think, I mean, one that sort of goes back to what I was trying to say about what kind of dwelling are we talking about?
Right. Yeah.
One thing working at home with, you know, 2 big studies, a nice big sitting room, place for the kids to play, all these mod cons, that applies to a vanishingly small proportion of people. Working at home in a small flat, where maybe there's 1 sitting room and perhaps a study if you're lucky, is a different proposition.
Any other comments that anybody wants to make about any of the talks or things that we haven't addressed? Because, you know, the topic is vast.
Hi, Eleonor. This is
Hello,
also from
Asa, yes.
the board.
Yes.
Hi. I would just like to say thank you all so much for everything. And now we're already a little bit over time. We have a few announcements to make. So would it be okay to?
Yes, please go ahead.
Stop now. And then in that case, I would first like to invite Magali to talk about the Caring Walk conference. Magali, are you there?
I am. Thank you. Sorry to jump in, and thank you all the speakers for very interesting interventions. We haven't been able, as in the current situation, to organize the Caring Walk with Carol Wright, but we will do that in hopefully and very close future. So we'll keep an eye out. I'm going to send details about Carol. She's a beekeeper, community gardener, and walker, and we had planned to organize really engaging embodied walk around care. So this is still in the pipeline. As soon as the restrictions are lifted and we are able to organize that, we'll be keeping you informed. So I'm sending information in, so just to keep you informed. But thank you for allowing me this little space. I'm sending it now.
Okay, I muted myself. Then I would like to ask Carly from the Middlesex team, who has done an incredible job to pull all this together, to say a few last words. Carly?
Hi, thank you. Thank you everyone for a fantastic session. This has been really great. I've been posting things in the chat, but I just wanted to say that from each of the sessions, we're sort of gathering together a load of resources, links that people have put in, all that kind of thing. If any of the speakers from today, I'm going to follow up with an email just to ask if you want anything added. I'll send that out in an email, but I'm aware that I might not have all the email addresses of everybody who's here. So if by the end of next week you haven't heard anything and you want the list of resources from all the talks, then you can either email the AtGender conference email address that you emailed to get the details of these talks, or you're welcome to email me at c.guest@mdx.ac.uk. I'll put that in the chat, and I'll put the other email address in the chat, which I can't remember right at the moment. But I just wanted to flag that we are sending stuff out, but if I haven't got your email, then do kind of get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Then at AtGender, we had an idea now that a lot of people are thinking about researching, studying, writing about the COVID-19 and gender in different aspects, of course, including gender and care, but not only. We thought maybe there could be a need to have a little platform, maybe just an email list and occasional online discussions, but still something to help people who are interested in these topics stay in touch with each other and share information. And we thought also that if you could be interested in that, you can also email us at info@atgender.eu. Maybe Sarah, you can post the link to our email in the chat box. But then I also saw above that Gail was talking about the feminist library, also wanting to do online sessions on the topic here. So maybe we can do something together. So anyway, if you would be interested in participating in such a group, formal, informal, we don't really know what shape it would take yet, please send us an email and we will try to set it up. Now, I would also like to announce that we really do hope that we can meet in person next year for the European Feminist Research Conference that will normally take place in Milan on the 21st to 24th of June next year. And that is the big research-focused conference that we do every 3 years. To give you an idea, last time it was in Göttingen in Germany, and we had almost 900 people. It was absolutely fabulous. So we really do hope that we can do it next year. Otherwise, we will have to come up with a plan B, but so far we will plan as if it will work. Now, thanks to Eleonor for putting this together. Thanks you to all the presenters of this very interesting session. And all the participants of all the six sessions during these 3 days. It really shows the need to talk about care for ourselves, care for each other, and in society at large. And how do we make the shift from care in uncaring times to care in caring times? That is something to work on further. And again, a large thank you to the Middlesex team for pulling this off. First of all, for all the work you put in planning the conference as it was supposed to be, and now doing this really fantastic work. Thank you so much. It's really fantastic that we can all be together despite not physically being together and geographically, and that allows also people from so far away to attend and to be with us. It's great that we can have still this community. And so, yeah, the conference for this year is thus over. And on behalf of AtGender, I wish you to stay safe, to stay in touch, and to take care of yourself and of others. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
And can we say thank you to AtGender as well, because you've supported us throughout kind of the trying to put the face-to-face conference on, and then all the plans to get the online conference sorted. So thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, and bye-bye. See you soon.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.